Hello, and welcome to today's event, How to Attract and Retain the Incoming Generation of Government Employees. My name is Paul Clanton. I'm a Senior Fellow for the Center for Digital Government and past CIO for Douglas County, Colorado, Merced County, California, and the City of Thornton, also in Colorado. I'm excited to serve as moderator for today's event and just want to say thank you for joining us. I know we're in for an informative session over the next 60 minutes. Before we begin, I have a few quick housekeeping notes that I hope will help you get the most out of your webinar experience. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to all registrants within 48 hours, and you can use the recording for your reference or to pass along to colleagues. If you would like to download a PDF of the slides for this presentation, you can do so by clicking the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of the console. This webcast is designed to be interactive. You can participate in the Q&A by asking questions at any time during the presentation. You should see a Q&A box on the bottom left of the presentation panel. Please send in your questions as they come up throughout the presentation. Our speakers will answer as many of these questions as they can during the Q&A portion at the close of the webinar. Also, during today's webinar, you'll be able to connect with your peers via LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Please use the hashtag GovTechLive to connect with your peers across the government technology platform via Twitter. At the close of the webinar, we'd like to hear what you thought of it, so we encourage you to complete a brief survey. If you're unable to stay with us for the entire webinar but would like to share your thoughts, please click the survey widget at the bottom of the screen to launch it. Otherwise, it will pop up once the webinar concludes. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers, and if you're experiencing any media player issues or have any other problems, please visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the help button at the bottom of the console. Joining me today to discuss this very timely topic are Steve Dobberowsky and Sharon Williams. Steve is Principal Consultant of Thought Leadership and Advisory Services for Cornerstone. Steve is a former federal government executive with 11 years of competitive service. He spent 7 years in HR and HRIT leadership roles, ensuring effective talent management processes at the bureau level, the department level, and at a shared services center where he delivered solutions from multiple agencies. He has guided numerous agencies and organizations through successful implementations and utilization of unified talent management suites. His areas of expertise within Cornerstone include learning management, performance management, succession planning, and Connect. Steve is a proven business-savvy leader with a track record of providing high-quality, innovative services and solutions. Utilizing his initial professional experiences as a high school teacher, he is a seasoned leader who leverages resources, information, knowledge, skills, and technology to develop people, foster relationships, and build partnerships. Our other speaker is Sharon Williams. She's the manager of onboarding and professional development for the City of Durham, a role she has occupied for the last 2 years. Her primary responsibilities include the design, development, and implementation of the city's strategic training plan. In order to implement the plan for the city's 2,400 employees, Sharon is leveraging technology-based solutions for onboarding, succession management, and talent development. Her professional career includes more than 15 years of director-level experience implementing organizational and talent development solutions for government, publicly traded, and privately held organizations. Prior to her tenure with the City of Durham, Sharon was a director of executive education programs at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. At UNC, Sharon worked closely with clients to identify current and future organizational development needs, for which she designed and implemented robust learning solutions. So now that you know a little bit about our speakers, I'm going to pass the mic over to Steve. Steve?
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you first for hosting us in this webinar, and thank you to Sharon Williams for participating in this conversation, which I think is a very interactive and a very timely, as you mentioned, Paul, topic, and something that is of keen interest across all levels of government, whether we're talking federal government in my area of expertise or Sharon's role in state and local. What's going to be interesting is talking about kind of our experiences. Both Sharon and I have public service experience. The one thing that Paul didn't mention, I kind of withhold this, is I was at the Shared Service Center in the federal government, and then I did a stint at the IRS in leadership and development, and that always usually proves to make me the least popular person in the room. But I was had a learning and development for IRS for a number of years, so a number of different experiences in talent management. And you know, a lot of the challenges and things that we see in public sector are really unique, and some of them are not. And this idea of attracting and retaining this incoming new workforce is not something unique to the workforce, the public sector and the government, but it is interesting and challenging in certain areas. And we'll talk about some of that as we're going through. I want to lay out a couple things, and then I'll ask Sharon what's going on in Durham and how things are going in Durham and how are they facing those challenges. It's going to be a very informal conversation between Sharon and I, and we're going to bounce back and forth. But I want to put some information in front of you so we have this to kind of frame the question. And the first question I want to ask is, who's the workforce? Nowadays, we have multiple generations. Some say 5 generations in the actual workforce. So the who has actually changed. What we're asking those folks to do in terms of the work that they do is changing. So the what is changing. You know, devices and technologies have entered into it, and so the where is coming into it. We have flexible schedules, and we have people working different weekend hours or late at night. So the when is actually changing, and how they actually do the work, whether we ask them to work with colleagues or whether it's done individually, the how has actually changed how we do work. So the actual work context is very transient right now, and it's changing. So if we then added another couple color points in here is when we look at the workforce today, we know that, you know, the baby boomers, we see about 10,000 of them turn 65 every day. We also know that it's a volatile job market. People, from when I began in the government, it used to be that you go into the government for, you know, it's a secure job and people stay there for their entire careers. That's no longer really the same. It's changed. We have to adapt as organizations in order to recognize that and make sure that we're keeping those folks and attracting those folks that we actually want. What we know is about, you know, just shy of 3/4 of the workforce is actually actively looking or open to a new job. And most times people would take a call from another position. And we all know attracting and keeping the high pros or high performing employees is really difficult, because especially in the case of high performing, if we're not throwing them into new challenges and stretch assignments, we're going to have them as a less engaged factor in our organization, and that's no good for anyone. No good for the employee and no good for the organization. So here's some of the actual layout of the workforce. You can actually see, and this is projected out to 2020, and this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This shows, you can see this flood of people coming in, that you can see the generational tide coming in from 2022. You can see the gray coming in, and if you just track that number, the gray number coming in shows you the actual numbers, and watch what happens to that kind of generational curve that we see coming into the workforce. You know, we also live in a global society. Predominantly, I'm assuming most of the folks on here are state and local in the U.S., but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's all U.S. And it's just because you're U.S., state and local does not necessarily mean that you don't have to be a global organization. Some of your customers and some of your interactions may be international interactions. What was interesting about this slide is it shows the median ages of the actual workforce, and you can see that we're pretty senior in terms of workforce, 37, when you look at comparatively in terms of other organizations. And what that tells us is that the baby boomers and the silver tsunami that we kept forecasting is really not happening, and we're not seeing people leaving the workforce in the predicted levels that we actually saw. want to pose something to you. You know, if we accept the fact that 50% of the world population was under 30 in 2010, it says that there's this wave of new generations and next generations. I want to pose something to you. I know you've attended a number of different sessions about Gen Y or millennials or the next generation or whatever kind of generational talk you want to throw in there. We can acknowledge that Gen Y is different and it has certain needs, but so was baby boomers and so was, you know, Gen X. Each generation had their unique things about them, but what if we actually say Gen Y is different, but really that's not why the actual workforce is changing? What if I threw out a radical idea, and if it wasn't generational, it wasn't changing the workforce, it was about the technology adoption. Nowadays, when we live in a society when we want now and we want it instantly, if we're not able as an organization to change, we're not going to be able to attract and retain those individuals that we want to, and those employees that we want to keep. I want to talk a little bit later on about some of the dangers and challenges of not adapting and not changing to the newer technologies and what that means for organizations specific to the public sector. I want you to think back to the year 2007. That was, you know, 10 years ago, a decade ago. That probably looked, if you guys think real hard, it probably looked something like this, right? I'm sure this is not how it looked. It was more like this, and we were facing a number of different things in our world, but it wasn't as severe as that. But it was very severe in terms of technology. If you think back in 2007, Gmail by Google was still in its beta format. So a decade ago, it was in a beta format. If you think of recreations and entertainment, the Wii was just making a come out, right? So it was just making its entrance onto the stage. And there was also this introduction of this thing called MySpace. Interesting story is my father actually still calls Facebook MySpace. So it was out there in 2007, but it was still this new thing. And it really hadn't started to change the world yet in terms of how we interact with the work we do and how we actually do the work. In 2007, how many of you remember the Razor? This was the #1 phone in 2007. Think back about that. I'm sure a lot of you had the Razor, and I was one of them. I started out in the Razor, and I think about it, I laugh. I remember trying to take a picture with the Razor when that was new. I also remember trying to type in a text into the actual Razor. The changing technology as a consumer started having an impact on us as an organization or as individuals. It didn't necessarily impact us as an organization yet. But what started happening in 2009, and Apple just did its new release of its new phone, and they announced that they had been out a decade, right? So in 2007, they limited a limited release, but it wasn't until 2009 when it was out available on all cell phone service providers. And what happened was an immediate impact on how we did our different connections and different things. How we connected to each other as individuals changed just because we could download apps and communicate all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, through our mobile device, through Facebook, through apps. What also started to happen is it started to change how we actually made decisions as individuals, right? So I would venture to say that all of you have looked at Yelp or some sort of Google Maps that you've leveraged, and how do you decide where to go for vacation? Those types of things are now impacted by what others share. We became more of a sharing society. And I guess how we actually looked for jobs and how we actually became a different approach. For example, Glassdoor. I would ask you, how many of you know what your organization review is like on Glassdoor? So, Sharon, I'm going to pull you in here, and I guess I want to pulse you and ask you, how are you guys seeing the introduction of mobile and these apps and maybe even Glassdoor? Because I did look up the city of Durham, North Carolina under Glassdoor, and you guys have very positive reviews you know, 3/4 of your employees would recommend it to someone else. It's pretty high up in terms of recommendation scores. How are you seeing that impact as an organization at Durham?
So we are very, very cognizant of what the citizens think, and we are very much connected in many of the ways that we can be, not all of the ways that we can be, to whatever technology is out there that we can use. I mean, we have a Facebook page that we are monitoring constantly because we want input. We have a TV show where we record information that might be useful to the citizens of Durham on an ongoing basis, and we make it available. And so we're just using technology in a variety of ways because we provide a service to the citizens of the city.
So it provides an avenue for communication and interaction with citizens that wasn't there before.
And continuously, as much as we can.
Perfect. So that concept of Glassdoor and knowing your reputation, knowing your brand, we'll talk about this later, but it really is changing how we interact as a society in terms of our personal lives and having an impact on us as we start to look for organizations that we want to work for. We want to consider what other people think about us. And so before people consider taking a job, they'll dive into it and find out what others are saying. How they interact with them as an organization has changed, whether or not they have a Facebook page. And we'll talk about kind of the percentages and social media and that kind of stuff that's going on in a minute. So really what was happening is this idea of consumerizing the technology, making it user-friendly and easy to use, taking the obstacles out of the way for the end user to use it, really started to blur the line between personal and work. And so we couldn't really ignore it as a workforce and as a successful organization. You know, this is CEOs, but you can easily replace this with, you know, leaders of organizations, whether it's mayors or directors or whomever at the top of your organization. One of the top concerns that organizations have is trying to keep up with the pace of technological change. And I'll give you an example from my experience. And I know I'm not revealing anything secret or anything, but IRS, for example, is not necessarily known for rapid adoption of change. And so what we found is that idea of supporting older technologies became more and more expensive. A couple years ago in IRS, we were on so many versions behind Microsoft Windows that they just stopped supporting us at that point. And so we had to actually pay for additional support. And then we additionally got it and started to upgrade and make those types of decisions based on the cost to actually maintain it. So it becomes really expensive to maintain if we don't deal with the change of technology. I want to toss out a poll question to you as an organization. If you were representing and answering your question, which one of these applies the most to your organization? And I want you to pick one. Does your organization keep up with the rapid pace of technological change? Is it not a concern for your organization? And keeping up with the rapid pace of change is somewhat of a concern for your organization, or it is a concern of your organization. I want to give you a second to respond and just see kind of where we are in terms of change. Some of our organizations deal a lot with recruiting and attracting millennials or generational changes, but what about technological change? Do you have a plan in place, or is it a concern for some of you in terms of the rapid pace and your willingness to address it as an organization? And I'm going to just keep it open a second longer, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit the next slide and see that it is a concern for most of you if you combine the is and the somewhat. So this is something that is really tapping a nerve with organizations, this idea of as soon as we upgrade to the latest technology, we're already out of date, right? So this has become a problem in government because there's so many obstacles and so many different things that we have to get through in order to get these changes accepted. And, you know, whether it's security or concerns for public-facing information. Those types of questions and stuff come into this as we're considering whether we want to adopt to the new technologies. So very interesting. What we know about our workforce today is that they are technologically native, meaning the workforce that's coming into the work today has been born on this technology and they've lived with it their entire life. They're not of the older generation and they're adapting to it. They are already native on it. We also know that our workforce today has a global reach, and you'll see some of this in one of the slides that we talk about what the global access is and what's going on in terms of global community and how that's having an impact on our work. We have a generation of workers today, meaning all workers, where we want it now, right? We have an expectation of information. We want to be able to know it. We want to Google it. We want to get it right at our fingertips, and we want that information right now. I want to say one thing here about something that I want to take a guess here for you. I'm going to throw a picture up here, and what I would like you to do is tell me if you know what this is. And by doing this, type in the Q&A, type in the Q&A box at the bottom of the field here, and type in if you know the answer to what this is. I live in Washington, D.C., and maybe 2 months or so ago, I walk everywhere in downtown D.C., and I saw this on the street. Anyone have any ideas as to what this is? Any interaction? I'll give you another closer up. So I'm not seeing a number of responses. Maybe I am. Yes, I'm actually pretty good guesses. This was a delivery robot. Yeah, this was Amazon is piloting a new technology, and I'm sure you've heard about it in the little drones that they're also doing. But this was so fascinating to me. This was such, and granted, this has very little to do with the way we do work, but I had to include this slide because the way we do different things is really impacting us. So for example, Amazon has adapted the way it does work because of new technologies, the way its delivery people are doing or not doing the work. So just as a side note, I actually followed this robot around the city for about 10 minutes and just asked the guy that was demoing this all this different questions like, what do you do if someone tries to steal it? And it was just really fascinating. If you are interested, Google the Amazon pilot on the delivery bot. But it was really fascinating. But really, it changes the way we as consumers do it, but also changes the way the organization, in this case, Amazon, does its delivery and its work, right? So we have digital natives and we have digital immigrants. Let's take a look at some of our generations and how they're adapting to the different workforce, right? So the younger generations, the folks that are 6 to 12 years old, the children, about half of them really wanted an iPad last year for Christmas. This was actually 2016 stat. I'm sure it was more in 2017. You know, 75% of folks that are 12 to 17-year-olds now own cell phones. And then what we're seeing now, organizations and schools and universities and companies are taking a stab at giving them tablets to do them work. I know of one university that instead of buying textbooks, you buy an iPad and all of your content is actually on the iPad or tablet or whatever they decided to use. But you know, 3/4 of the organizations that did this, or the students that were out there said that they would help them perform better in class if we had a tablet. Pretty fascinating the way we actually look at it. Now let's take a look at some of the other generations. It's not just limited to the younger generation coming in. The boomers, the folks that are more senior, they're the fastest growing user adopters of mobile devices. And seniors are right there behind them. We have our seniors that are now utilizing a tablet. A third of our folks are using a tablet. 1 in 5 said that they actually have an e-reader. And 40, which 4 in 10, say they have a smartphone. This is drastically different than where we were even 5 years ago as organizations. Now, I know, Sharon, you have a lot of initiatives going on in Durham that have to do with mobile device access, like onboarding and recruiting. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in Durham there with the adoption of mobile devices and mobile technologies.
So you were right, Steve. I've only been here for 2 years, and I was surprised to find how much has actually been automated. And the automation is because of the different generations that are in the workplace and our desire to attract them and them wanting things that are more automated. So we have automated the application process. So you just go online, you fill out your application, and then we've automated the screening process for the first round. We've automated onboarding, so once they are hired, there are many things that are basic onboarding tasks that they can do because we can simply push something out to them electronically, and they can complete it electronically and push it back, so they never have to touch paper. We've added a learning management system, so we have 24/7, 365 access. We have mobile accessibility, and we added video content because they wanted learning that was just in time and right when they needed it. So again, because of the different generations that we serve, these are the kinds of things that we've started to do, and every day there just seems like a need for more.
And so, in thinking about that and how you actually, as an organization, deployed that, what would you say some of the challenges were to get to that point? Or what was the biggest challenge that you think that Durham faced and overcame? Was it?
Well,
Go
ahead.
Was it the security concern? Was it the awareness? Was it bureaucracy? You know, we all deal with those types of things. But what was the biggest thing that Durham overcame in that?
So I'm going to say that it's some of the things that you named, but first and foremost, it was the different generations who kind of saw the world differently, and you had some fear and some trepidation about some of the things that we were doing because they involved change. So change really affects any decisions that you're going to make as you're looking at how you can better serve the multitude of generations that are in the workforce. And then, of course, we're a city organization, so we're government, and bureaucracy and security were both huge concerns.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to see that you guys have faced those challenges and overcome them. Let me toss up a couple more slides, and then we'll take a poll question again. What I wanted to continue maybe talking about is just the broad expanse of this. And I know, Sharon, that you guys are actually doing this in your mobile devices, but maybe you can talk a little bit about how you guys are leveraging. You just deployed an LMS. You have 365-day access, 24/7. A little bit about content. When we know that YouTube has 6 billion minutes of video watched each month by 1 billion unique visitors, 300 hours of videos uploaded every minute to YouTube. YouTube reaches more young folks than any cable network that's out there. And we know that almost half of those views are viewed on a smartphone or mobile device. What are you guys doing with content and that access to immediate, I want it at my fingertips when I need it? Sharon, are you there?
Sorry, I am. I forgot that I was on mute. That was a great question. When I first moved into the position, I realized that we did not have a lot of content, like instructor-led content, video-based content, even paper-based content, PowerPoints and things like that people were accessing, and that they wanted to learn, but to learn differently and faster. So we did purchase a learning management system, but we decided to front-end load that system with video content. That was a great decision because that gave us the ability to implement push and pull strategy, which is to push content out to our employees to get them accustomed to the change, and then to give them the ability to access that content on their own when they want it from where they want it. So video content coupled with a learning management system has been a huge plus for us because it allowed us to do things like load content from YouTube that people are watching all the time, but that they can easily access if it was applicable to our business.
Right, and so when I was in the federal government, what I saw as a resistance, and I'm sure this is the same for you, is this resistance to opening up the boundaries to stuff like YouTube and TED Talks or whatever, because the learning often was HR gives it to me, or my training and development folks give it to me. I don't actually have to go out and seek it. It sounds like you guys are moving towards a pull society, which is really where you want to be in a learning organization. Is we want to put the content out there, and we want our folks to know about it, and they want to consume it when they're ready to consume it, and as much as they want to consume, right? So sounds like you guys are doing some really exciting stuff in Durham, so good on you guys.
Well, thank you, and we even we use the brand City U, because for us, learning is all about you. So it's not City University, it's City and the letter U. And our message to employees is that learning and the kinds of things you're involved and engaged in is about you and what you're willing to reach for. And that's a message right now that's resonating with all the generations.
And I think that's a really great point, because I think that that whole same concept of Glassdoor and being aware about what your employees are saying about you as a system, like if you're the LMS owner in this instance, you have to be aware of what your users are saying and what you're having. And part of that is really what's the foundation or the theme of your system, right? Connect it with our end users, our employees, our citizens, making sure that it's relevant to them and it's consistent and it's in line with your organization's mission, vision, and goals, right? So City U, I would have guessed, or CU, I would have guessed that it would have been City University, but I love the distinction where it's City and U. I think that's great. It's increasing, right? So we know now all this mobile traffic is, it used to be where we talked on the phone, a landline. Now we have mobile devices. Now we talk on mobile devices. Now we no longer talk, but we text or we chat on a phone. And now we don't text or chat anymore. We send videos. How we communicate is being impacted by all these different factors, and it's increasing greatly. If we take a look at the mobile traffic that's coming in 2020, 3/4 of the mobile traffic is going to be all video. And there's some staggering numbers in here down the road. Here's one of the bottom lines with all the things that are going on in terms of the employee user experience and what's going on in their life. Imagine the information overload that they're having. We see that our employees are spending 25% of the day reading or answering their emails. 1/4 of their day is spent reading or answering it. Just think about how many of times in a day you actually look at your mobile device, you as the end user. On average, and this is a study by Deloitte in 2014 and 2015, this has probably gone up a bit, but most adults look at their phone 150 times. Managing that flow of information into a person is hard enough. When you combine it into a work and an employee situation, we really are having to whittle down what we do and making it very user-focused and very user-friendly. What kinds of things, Sharon, are you guys actually doing for the end user and making it, clearing obstacles, and what type of things are you doing in Durham? Are you doing any sort of social networking or collaboration?
No, we are looking at a couple of different things, like some things around social collaboration, because we have a system now that will support that. We've upgraded our bandwidth. We're giving employees that are on our trucks that pick up refuse access to tablets, and so we're trying to enable technology more everywhere to get people interested in using it. And I'm not sure if I answered the root of your question.
You did, because it's all about the interaction that the end user has, the employee has with the information and interchanging. What we know about you know, the way we interact. We looking at Yelp and Glassdoor and those types of things. We need input from others. That's changed the way we work because it's no longer go off and do it by yourself. It's go off, find some folks that you can actually work with across the organization and get the work done, whether that's with technology or just individual people, right? So anything that we can do to make it a personalized experience, get rid of all the obstacles to getting access to it, making sure that we reinforce and encourage, you know, this location and flexible workforce, making sure that we're making sure that we have the end user in control of when they actually get the learning and development or when they're actually able to apply and do their resumes. Whatever it is, talent management has an impact when we start talking about end user focus. So let me toss another poll question out for the folks. Which of these applies to your organization? My organization has technology solutions that met all those criteria, the ease of use, location and flexibility, access anywhere, and when on demand, those criteria. And the second part, or the second option would be, do you match some of these criteria as an organization, or do you match none of these? So which one is it? You have all of them, some of them, or none of them, going from top to bottom. I'll give you a second to complete the submit. So select your button, which option you have, and then hit submit. Okay, so it sounds like some of you are getting it. So about just shy of 3/4 of the folks that responded said that they have some of those things as a driving factor in how they actually implement or as organizations, how they're dealing with technology. I want to start getting into some of the, as you're going through some of these things and deploying new systems, new technologies, new changes, there's something that goes on that there's three things that we need to boil it down into. And this is probably maybe one strong bottom line for this presentation. There needs to be three factors. And this was taken from 2017 McKinsey study from CEOs talking to HR and what you need to be to do to successful as organizations. So they said, if you want to be successful in any sort of HR transformation, you need to focus in on continuous process improvement. You need to realize that once you do it, you're not done. You have to then go back and redo some of these things. It's like an agile approach to technology and deployment, making sure that we're providing access to information online or easily providing access to transactions, simplifying processes. And I know that this sounds foreign to government because we're used to, or typically, you know, the joke is bureaucracy, red tape. So making the process the real meat of what we need to do and making it very user focused on what the end user needs, making it easier for them to make decisions. The next thing that you need to be successful on is making sure that you're incorporating some of the next-gen automation. So it's not necessarily enough for you to be focused in on what was popular 2-3 years ago. Mobile is making a big impact. What's next? Start asking yourself as organization, get out there and figure out what's coming down the road. This stuff like robotic process automating. So this is stuff like automation, automatic intelligence, or artificial intelligence when we start talking about things like help desk and answering simple questions, making our systems do things that make logic. If I submit this resume, it goes a certain place based on what it knows about the process and where it should be going. And then also thinking about stuff like all the different language processors that are out there, like Siri and, you know, I forget all the other ones, but there's a number of them out there now. Even Google has it, talking to Google and making sure that it's processing language, making sure that we're incorporating kind of what's coming next, not just what's already out there. And then ultimately, and this one I think is probably the most important, is the user experience. Making sure we understand what our user experience is when we interact with our folks. Our end user, our employees should be focused in on that end user. So when we start to look at how that impacts the different things, the way we used to do it in terms of legacy, in terms of training, we're now going to this learning, this concept of, Sharon, what you said about moving towards a more learning organization, and it's consumer-driven or employee-driven as opposed to HR. You know, performance management, and this may not necessarily be hitting the government yet, but it's something that's coming down the road in terms of organizational discussions, where performance management used to be all about the employer. We're doing it for compliance reasons. We're doing it for, you know, making sure we're checking the boxes and covering ourselves. Now we're seeing it focusing more on career development. It's more about the employee. You know, when we start talking about training and learning and onboarding and applicant tracking, it's less time box and it's more ongoing. And we're now seeing the stressing on not so much on formal learning, but on the informal learning that happens as well as organizations. So I guess, how are you guys in Durham incorporating some of this? Like, do you have to be there on site to be employed? Do you have remote workforce? How are you guys actually addressing some of the changes that are going on just with like the workforce, what their needs are?
Because we are so different in terms of what we do, we have 24 different departments. So we've allowed some of those decisions to be made at the departmental level rather than it's a top-down mandated rule of thumb. So, for example, there's some departments that have flexible work schedules just because of the nature of what it is that they do. And it's not applicable enterprise-wide. It's one of the reasons that when we looked at learning, we had to make it more like the slide that you have up that talks about today. We had to make it more ongoing and continuous and accessible anywhere just because of the nature of our workforce. So we've got some flexibility that's built in, but those decisions have been pushed down in our organization.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is true wherever it is that we go. And I think these are all best practices, but it's not necessarily going to be appropriate for everyone in every different location, organizations. There are just some things that you're not going to be able to do remotely, for example. You know, so you have to be cognizant of that and be flexible. And you also need to be fair and transparent about it as well. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the user experience. And what's interesting is you start to see a couple things in terms of how I'll use Netflix in this instance as the example here. And what's interesting here is the number of folks in terms of the different generations that actually use Netflix. And then I want you to take a look at on the right-hand side when we talk about, you know, folks that viewed this as television, right? So when we talk about television, they associated watching television with Netflix. So you can see the exact opposite. So Netflix versus broadcast TV. So when we asked them, do you watch TV? And then we said yes or no. And then we asked them, which do you consider TV? Is it like ABC, CBS, NBC, whatever? Or is it Netflix? And the majority of them by generational had an inverse reaction. You can see that the boomers on the right-hand side, most of them viewed cable TV networks as watching TV, but the younger generations viewed Netflix as so it's really having an impact on how they're actually consuming content, right? So we have a new generation that's coming into the workforce that has always been used to getting content in their way. They want it now, they want it in the way they need it, and they want it immediately. And so, excuse me there, you really have to be aware of the next steps, and these are some of the things that are coming down of the organization on how it's going to have an impact on our workforce, right? So when we start talking about end user experience, it becomes really critical when we start talking about how our end users view the system, right? So this idea of focusing in on the learner experience becomes critical to the success as we start looking at different initiatives, whether it's a learning management system, whether it's onboarding. If we're not considering what they need and when they need it, we're not going to be successful, right? Putting Netflix, I'm sure you've seen now, you choose who's watching it, it knows what you like, it knows what you rated, what others have said about it, and it positions that in front of the end users. So if we're not having these types of conversations about the processes, then we're not being responsive to the technologies that are coming out. I'm going to speed up a little bit, but I want to pull your question. I want to talk a little bit about social media. I want to ask you, so access to all social media sites. So this would be stuff like Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and Snapchat and you name it, right? Access, the first question is, or the first option is, it's blocked by my organization. It's blocked by my organization. Some of it is blocked by my organization, or they allow full access to all media, all sites. I'll give you a few seconds to choose which box is relevant to you as an organization. So it goes, all are blocked, some are blocked, and full access on the bottom. And then hit submit. So we will see how many people. So a lot of them, if you boil down the bottom two, are not allowing them access to social media sites. Where does Durham fall on that spectrum, Sharon?
We actually have access to all social media sites. We do have a policy because we are city government, so you can't appear to be speaking on behalf of the city with regard to, let's say, politically charged things that might be going on. But we have access to all social media sites that we would like to access during our normal working hours.
Yeah, I mean, it really becomes something that becomes, you know, either you're going to address it or you're not. But if you're not realizing how that's going to impact you doing your business as an organization and whether or not you're able to attract the folks that now say that they need it in order to do, you know, effective collaboration. I want to speed up because I do want to get to some of the questions that may have come up. So in light of the time, I'm going to move a little bit faster. I know that a version of this slide deck is going to be available after the presentation. You could also look at this presentation after it's done. But really, if you look at Josh Burson, and I'm certain you know who Josh Burson is. It's Burson by Deloitte, you know, one of the most prevalent HR technology companies out there, says that really the way we do corporate or the way we do organizations, it's going to be much different, and it looks a lot like TV. So that whole concept of moving towards this Netflix society and community is becoming more and more prevalent. Just a few other things about how we're doing social media. Just a lot of folks using it, and folks over 45 are the fastest users, growing users of Snapchat. What's interesting, and I talked about this globally, is it's becoming more and more, right? So 80% of YouTube traffic is non-US. So recognizing that, you know, we're giving our folks access to not just stuff that's in the US. We're used to being US bound, or city bound or state bound, but that boundaries are disappearing because of these technologies and these increases in it. And just real quick, you know, when we looked at 500, Inc. 500, and this is probably even worse in the government, but when we look at it, there's not everybody is doing it. And in fact, 36% of the folks that were asked, and this does include government, 36% of the folks were not allowing them to access anything. And I think that holds true with some of the unofficial polling that we just did with those numbers, right? So how do we then become social in HR, right? So we know that all these changes are going on. We know technology is a force us to change. Would you say, Sharon, and maybe toss it to you, and then I'll move to close it. Would you say that Durham has adjusted recruiting or HR strategies in the last 3 to 5 years?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They've adjusted, and they continue to adjust.
How so?
So, I mean, we could go anywhere from recruiting, which was more narrowly focused, to being much broader focused. We could go to the way that we take people through the application process or through how we onboard them. Just every aspect of the way that things are done today are vastly different than they were done even 2 years ago. Yeah. So the city is continuing to change and to continuing to look at technological enhancements that will help us to attract that younger workforce. Our average age group is about 45, 46 years old. So we're an aging population of workers, and we've got to attract the more youthful talent that's out there, the different generations. So we have to continue to change.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you guys are addressing this, right? So when we talk about what does this mean for different things within talent management, I've just got like a few minutes left, and I just want to get this out to you, right? So sourcing, recruiting, branding, making sure that we're focused in on the candidate experience, all really important when we talk about talent acquisition. Sounds like you guys have done a great job on that. When we look at talent management and how we impact it, one of the things that I find organizations often miss is this opportunity to re-recruit. You know, if we accept the fact that multiple people are going to leave different organizations multiple times, on average they have about 11 different careers in their 11 different jobs in their career. If we accept that as organizations, what about going back and getting those folks that left for whatever reason, right? So we know them, so why not go out and there do that, get them from other organizations, be attractive to our former employees, making sure that we don't cross them off the list because they left us, right? So open the door, making sure that we're actually getting internal employees. Recruiting from inside makes it much easier. We know who we're getting when we recruit from inside. And then ultimately developing talent. And this is, I just want to close with these types of things focusing in on development and talent. We talked a little bit about LMS, or mostly about LMS, but it's focusing in on the concept of social collaboration. Even mentoring programs doesn't have to be perfect, just get it started, making sure that we're allowing our folks to collaborate, and most importantly, making sure that we let our employees know that they have an opportunity to personally develop, whether it's a performance management related thing, whether it's a career related thing, maybe it's something not related to your job. Getting out of the way of that desire to develop our folks and making sure that they know it and it's easy for them to access. And finally, this unified talent management, this concept of bringing things all together, the learning, the performance, the onboarding, the recruiting, and in your area, Sharon, this succession planning. We have to know that this is not just for the future, it's current for those organizations that are actually looking towards the future, right? So it's something we need to be doing, and we need to be focused in on it and how to get there. So, question I would ask, and this is a hypothetical question, just ask yourself, are you ready? And one final thing, and then Sharon, I'll ask you if you have any closing thoughts. The question is, are you ready? You know, don't let perfection get in the way of progress, as Winston Churchill said. Making sure that you're taking steps, whether they're big steps, little steps, try to take it to the next level and push your organization. So Sharon, any closing words?
Steve, I think this was just well said. The eye has to be on the different generations and the talent that's out there and what it is that they need if we're going to continue to emerge as the place to work. And that's what we want to be. So you got to look to that future and technology.
Exactly. And that's going to bring us to a close for our content. I do want to say thank you, Sharon, for doing this. I have our contact information up there. And then I want to open it up back to Paul and see if there are any questions that we could answer.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Sharon. Yes, we have had a few questions come in. A couple of them have been about the slides in the presentation. Again, you can download the slides by clicking Webinar Resources, and we will also be emailing the presentation out to folks within 48 hours. All right, so let's get to that first question. We've got one that says, how do we keep the turnover down when things out of our control, like low salaries and pension reform, are causing employees to leave state government?
So
Sharon,
I'll take that.
Sharon?
No, I'll take that one on and just say that you have to fight back with the things that are in your control. What we've found is that some of the generations aren't the people that are going to stick around for decades to see if a position finally opens up that they're going to slot into. So you've got to put together some career pathing that allows them to see the possibilities for their future. And that future can't be 5, 10, 15 years away. And so you're still going to be fighting with the low salaries, but if they can see a path forward that's going to move them in the direction that they want to go, then you have a better chance of holding on to that talent until some future point when you can promote them into higher level positions.
That's an excellent point, Sharon. This is another one for you, Sharon. Mike writes that he'd like to hear more about the LMS, the Learning Management System. Was this developed in-house or is this a commercial solution?
I actually bought a commercial product, and we are city government, so we had to do an RFP process, and we had several vendors that applied. The vendor that we loved and that we still love is Cornerstone OnDemand. And we purchased Cornerstone system. We stood it up in November of last year, and it has been incredible. Our largest user is our police department, which was a shock. For a city organization, our police department is one of the larger groups in the city. They have a huge budget and has about 600 or 700 employees. 90% of them have logged into the learning management system and completed the required training. Because we use push-pull strategy, we pushed some video training out to them. 90% of them have completed that training. They've also gone in now and they've completed optional training. So we know that a learning management system was the right decision, and we front-end loaded it with video-based content that we also purchased off the shelf. And again, that was a right decision for our city.
Excellent. So here's another one. I think, Sharon, you're probably best able to answer it, but Steve, feel free to jump in. I understand this area of technology and its purpose. How does a city government use technology to teach or get the community to learn the boring but necessary regulations?
So very interesting. One of the reasons that I purchased the system that I did was because it's cloud-based. And one of the things that we know is that, 2, 3, 5 years into the future or today, we could actually add a portal that our citizens would be able to access so that we are sharing learning with them. That is something we aspire to. We have not done that yet, but that is certainly a goal that we have in mind, and we were delighted that we have a system that will allow us to do that.
The other thing I would add to that is I think it's also changing, and this is kind of bringing it home to the idea of technology having an impact on how we actually attract and retain our employees. The way we do different things, so the thing you just heard Sharon mention, the way that they have a portal, that's not something that we had typically thought of like an internal LMS doing before, right? So technology has changed how we interact with our employees in that aspect. We also have the components of like onboarding and applicant tracking stuff. So the way that our applicants interact with us and apply for jobs, I've seen some organizations and government agencies allow LinkedIn application processes. So if you have a LinkedIn profile and a LinkedIn resume, allowing you to submit your application through the new technologies and have the technologies on the end to support that. It goes back to the whole idea of end users and making them the focus of how we interact with them and what technologies we use to support that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So this is an interesting question, and I know it kind of vexes all of us that are leaders or managers or practitioners of technology. So Oscar writes, our organization has a wide range of positions from manual laborers to engineers. How do you develop a standardized onboarding system for employees that have such different work environments / experiences? Examples include employees in the office versus those in the field.
So I'm happy to answer this one because I have a real example of it, right? So I worked, I don't know if I said it, but I worked at the Treasury Department, and I worked in an organization called the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and it, you know, we have a very high mix of, you know, manual labor, blue collar versus white collar, office versus in the field kind of visits, and we also had enforcement. So what we actually did was we brought it into multiple different avenues, so vehicles. So we have mobile device, we have web access. You don't have to be behind our company or our organization's firewall. You can access it from any internet browser, and you can also do it while you're on site in there. So we made it multiple different vehicles. We also had to change our policies to reflect some of those things. So we had to allow certain, you know, we were very heavily unionized in our organization, and so we had to accommodate that idea of we're putting this onto our employees and asking them to complete this. This is when they're already employees, so maybe not relevant to the applicant, but it is certainly relevant to when they're on board. We created administrative time where we had to give them time during the job to complete these things, and we did it in a number of different ways. We had computer terminals that they were allowed to access during this time. We also gave them access to mobile devices, and they could use their own mobile devices if they choose to. We gave them multiple different options. And so the idea here is flexibility and multiple different approaches, and that's where I think you get the best bang for your buck. And that I think will hold true when you talk about people out in the field, different levels, different skill levels, different types of jobs. All those I think could be addressed in that manner.
And I agree, because with new employee orientation, what we're trying to accomplish is orientation to the organization that you have joined. So you should know that the organization has a strategy, that you're part of it, we have 24, 28 different departments, what it is that we do. And more important, you should know that we're a service organization. So we use new employee orientation, the physical high touch part of it, for that purpose. The low-touch part that can be electronically enabled, we believe that every person can do, because they can also access from their phones, their tablets, their home computers. So we've made it as easy as we could, regardless of how challenged you may be where technology is concerned.
Excellent. So I do want to be respectful of our 1 hour commitment, and I apologize that we went over a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that we got some of your questions answered. But we're going to have to wrap it up here. In closing, I would just like to thank everyone for joining us for today's event. A big thank you needs to go to my fellow speakers, or the main speakers, Steve and Sharon, thank you. And a special thanks to our partners at Cornerstone OnDemand for enabling us to bring you this worthwhile discussion. Thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at another government technology event.
Bye now.